Okay. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is Lorenzo Franceschi-Bicchierai. Thank you so much for being here. At this time, you probably want to get a spritz or something, so I appreciate you being here. I'm very excited to be here again. I was here 2 years ago, and it's great to be here once more. So today, we're going to talk about what I call the golden age of critical technology reporting and why we need more of it. My plan today is to talk about this topic for 20 to 25 minutes and then leave hopefully more than enough time for you guys to ask me anything. So if you want to know what it means to be a journalist covering tech in this day and age, please ask me at the end of the talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work, but also about the work of colleagues and people in the sector that I admire, that I think it's a good example of good tech journalism. So a little bit about me. I work for Motherboard, which is the tech and science website of Vice Media. Before that, I worked at Mashable, which covers social media and technology, and before that, I was an intern for a brief time at Wired magazine. You may have read one of my stories where I said that it's easier to find good pizza in New York City more than in most of Italy. It's still one of my most controversial articles, but we can talk about it later. We're not here to talk about pizza today. So why are we here today? We're here because in the past 20 years, digital technologies from the internet to the Internet of Things have dramatically reshaped the operations of industry and the exercising of individual rights. We now have smart assistants who listen in our homes at all times, small phones in our pockets that are more powerful than the computers that took us to the moon, and algorithms that can pick out a face from several meters away in the middle of a crowd. Tech is not just gizmos and tubes. It's part of our everyday lives now, for better and for worse. Companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft not only control incredible amounts of cash, they also have an outsized influence on the flow of information online, and consequently in our daily lives. What you see when you Google something or when you scroll in your Facebook feed is of crucial importance these days. As a result, what these companies decide to show you can change the way you think or the way you see the world. What we call the Big Five, or some people call them the Big Five, we're talking about Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. These companies are not only the biggest tech companies in the world, they're also the biggest companies, period. As you can see in the chart on the left, I think that's from 2017, these companies have been consistently in the top 5 or top 10 most valuable companies. And what's more interesting is that they're using this cash, this money, to influence politics by lobbying, both in Europe and the United States. Last year, Google and Facebook set records for lobbying in the US. Here's a chart of Google's spending in the US. Google and Facebook set records lobbying last year. Google spent $21.7 million. Facebook spent $12.6 million. In total, almost $35 million. And we can expect these numbers to go up more and more as more politicians in Europe and the United States, for example, Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic candidate for president in 2020, called for more regulation of these tech giants. Some have even called for breaking them up, like it happened with Microsoft in the 2000s. So why do these companies deserve our scrutiny? Just look at these headlines, for example. We have the New York Times saying, YouTube, the great radicalizer. The New Republic, Facebook as a genocide problem. And my own website, Motherboard, why Twitter is the best social media platform for disinformation. Did you ever think you'd read something like this just a few years ago about some of your favorite websites? The fundamental problem is that these services are designed to give you what you want in order to keep you on their sites. This is how their algorithms work, and they work just as intended. They're programmed to feed you what they think you want, not what they think you should read or watch. And these are just some examples of how dangerous these websites have become. In the case of YouTube, through its algorithm, researchers have noticed that the video platform recommends increasingly more extreme and radical content to its watchers. To simplify this a little bit, and it's oversimplification, but it's a good example, the more you watch videos about Trump or pro-Trump videos, the more YouTube gets recommendations for white supremacy, racism, and fascist videos. In the case of Facebook, this story was about how the Myanmar's military used Facebook to target the Rohingya minority in the country with propaganda. They also used Facebook to identify dissidents from this minority and ultimately persecute them. Facebook failed to see this happening and, quote, played a determining role in the genocide, according to researchers and the United Nations. On the other hand, Twitter, which is not as powerful as the other companies but highly influential as well, has historically been terrible at stopping fake accounts and trolls from poisoning its platform, facilitating the spread of disinformation and hate speech. Remember, YouTube was born to share cat videos, essentially. And now, kids and other young people are getting radicalized and served Nazi propaganda. Facebook was born essentially as a dating website, a hot or not for Harvard kids. And now we're wondering whether it helped dictators carry out genocide. Twitter was born as a microblogging website where people used to share what they had for breakfast. And now it's used by Russian government-sponsored trolls to push Kremlin propaganda and influence elections. We need more critical tech reporting to tell these stories and keep these companies in check. But there are challenges involved in that. Let me tell you a little story that illustrates some of the difficulties of tech reporting. It was 2014, and I was working at Mashable at the time. And I was writing a lot about something called the Syrian Electronic Army. This was a hacking group sponsored by the Syrian government that was mostly famous for hacking other journalists. And they were very good at doing that and getting attention from other journalists as well. From a technical perspective, they were not very good, but they got a lot of attention by hacking the media. You may remember one of the Syrian Electronic Army's most famous hacks. They broke into the Associated Press Twitter account and wrote that there was an explosion at the White House and Barack Obama was injured. Obviously, this was fake, and it didn't last very long, but that small tweet made the stock market in the United States crash for a few minutes. So they were highly active at the time. And around that time, they also hacked into Microsoft and stole, specifically, they hacked into the email accounts of a few Microsoft employees. What they found there was a bunch of documents, confidential data, related to surveillance requests from the FBI. I was in touch with the group at the time, and they leaked these documents to me. They sent me these documents, emails, payments receipts, all stuff that detailed how the FBI requests and pays Microsoft for surveillance. Mind you, in the US, this is all legal. When the FBI wants information on somebody, it gets a warrant or a subpoena, sends it to a company like Microsoft, and then when the company complies, the company gets paid. We had documents that showed exactly how this process works. This was how surveillance works in the real world and how much it costs. And remember, this is like public money, right? This is taxes, taxpayers. This is our money if you live in the US funding this. And at the time, no one had seen actual receipts. No one had seen how actually this works behind the scenes. So we had proof of how it all worked. And because of this, I believed that there was a strong public interest argument for writing about these documents. So I went to my editors with a colleague, and we told them about this, and we were very excited. The editors were also pretty excited, and they told us, sure, dig into the documents, see what you can find, and let's do a story. And we thought we had a good scoop. But then, slowly, over the next few days, it became clear that the editors were not as excited anymore. Initially, they said that it would have been better if we had documents from other companies like Facebook and Google that would make a better story. And of course, that would have been a better story. But what we had there was already a story. We had documents from Microsoft. And then finally, I remember that they told us pretty explicitly that this story was not worth jeopardizing their relationship with Microsoft. And what they were talking about was their relationship with Microsoft's PR department, which invited them to events and sent them gadgets in advance for release. So eventually, the story was killed. We were not allowed to publish it. There's a happy ending, though. The story eventually got published in the Daily Dot, another website, when my colleague left Mashable. And as far as I know, it did very well. I even remember that a PR person sent me the link to the story saying, hey, you should write about it, without knowing that I knew about it. So this confirmed once again that yes, the story was worth covering and we made a mistake. And I mentioned this story not only because, 5 years later, I'm still a little bit bitter about it, which I am, but because it illustrates one of the main challenges of covering tech. Companies like Apple especially, but also Facebook and Google, have been very good at seducing and courting journalists. They do it by giving the tech press early access to announcements and new products, and by seeding scoops and exclusives to journalists. They don't explicitly ask for positive coverage in exchange, but it's kind of implied. And even when it's not implied, you may anger them and you will lose access, and your competitors will still have it. This is what some people call access journalism. Journalism that is enabled by tech companies giving special access to reporters. Here on the left, you can see a good example of it. This was a couple of years ago, I think. Apple gave Wired magazine the exclusive first look at their new campus, their new shiny campus in Cupertino. It was a glowing and uncritical look at this building. On the right, you see the opposite side of the coin. This was almost 10 years ago at this point. Gizmodo found an iPhone prototype, wrote about it, and Apple was very angry. So they banned Gizmodo reporters from going to events for years. The good news, you don't need access to do good tech journalism. In fact, I think it's almost better not to have access. Access, in my opinion, is overrated because without access, you have an outsider mentality, it's easier to stay objective, and also it forces you to be a bit adversarial towards these companies, which is a great way to be skeptical and detect PR bullshit. At Motherboard, despite being a tech publication, we have very little access to companies like Microsoft, Google, or Facebook. That's mostly because we stay away from writing up their press releases, we don't review their products most of the time, and our coverage is usually critical. Here's two examples of impactful tech journalism stories that Motherboard has done with very limited access from these companies. In this one here, this one is about Google. We tracked down the memo that became viral, written by one of their employees at the time. His name was James Damore. And this was like essentially a manifesto, an anti-diversity and sexist manifesto. We wrote about it we were able to write about it, reaching out to Google employees and talking to them with no help from Google PR. We were the first ones to report on this internal memo and sparked a wide-ranging debate about gender equality in Silicon Valley. which is still a hot topic. In this story about Facebook, my colleagues Joseph Cox and Jason Kebler did a deep dive into how Facebook moderates content based on multiple leaked documents and several interviews with sources both inside and outside the company. Then, when they approached Facebook PR, to get their comment, as we have to do, obviously, they invited us to meet because we already had the story and they wanted to talk to us. So in this case, the access came after we had already, when we had the story already, when we had all the reporting done. In part as a result of our series of stories on content moderation on Facebook and other Facebook properties like Instagram, the company has changed some of its policies. For example, just last week, Facebook announced that it was banning white nationalism and white separatism, two ideologies that are equal to white supremacy, according to civil rights experts. And moreover, Facebook will now direct people who search or post such content to nonprofits that help educate people and help them leave hate groups. So as I said, access is overrated, but don't take my word for it. This is what Julia Angwin, in my opinion, one of the best tech reporters in the world, thinks about access journalism. Julia doesn't believe that she needs Google or Facebook to return her calls because she can do what she does without them. She said this when the New York Times interviewed her about her new company, a new startup, The Markup, a journalism venture that will focus especially on public interest stories focused on tech. So what is critical technology journalism exactly? How can we define it? Basically, it's journalism that holds tech companies accountable and looks at their products and actions with a critical eye. Not because these companies are awful, but because they're incredibly influential and powerful, and they deserved our scrutiny. This kind of journalism requires a deep understanding of the technologies involved. You don't need to code, but it can help. You just need to understand how tech works, and more importantly, how it affects real offline world. Another way to think about critical tech journalism is by defining what it should not be. Critical tech journalism is not writing about gadgets. It's not writing 5,000 words iPhone reviews. It's not rewriting press releases by these tech companies. There's no use in that. What's the point? People can already read them. In many ways, it's still good old-fashioned journalism. Talking to sources, especially those who work at those companies, gets you a long way and gets you the real story. Sometimes you don't need that, and you can get creative. You can do it without. You don't need to rely necessarily on human sources. Let's talk about an example of another excellent critical technology reporting that was done a few years ago. This was part of a series that ProPublica, a great online news magazine that reports on public interest stories, did about Facebook. In 2016, ProPublica reporters had the idea of becoming advertisers on Facebook in a way to figure out how the social network's advertising system actually works. This way, they discovered a category that advertisers could work with. This was called ethnic affinity. They then realized that they could use this category to exclude certain ethnicities from ads, such as blacks or Latinos. And in the United States, it's illegal to publish any ad for housing that discriminates based on race, color, religion, or other characteristics. And here you can see Facebook's internal advertising portal that allowed companies to specifically exclude demographics from selling their ads. And as I said, these let advertisers discriminate when showing ads for housing, employment, and credit. And you may think that this is not a big deal, but consider that Facebook has 2 billion people and counting on it. An ad on a platform like Facebook can reach more people than any ad on television ever could. Advertising practices like this ones can help protract ancient inequalities that lead to less diversity and segregated cities and workplaces. If a Black or Latino, for example, is not shown ads for apartments in a certain neighborhood, they're less likely to go live in that neighborhood, for example. A year after in this investigation, ProPublica did the same test again and saw that they could still target ads based on race or nationality. This is how I imagine their faces when they did the test again. There's good news though. 3 years later, just a few weeks ago, Facebook announced that it will stop these practices and not allow advertisers to discriminate this way. At the same time, the US government Department of Housing and Urban Development sued Facebook, filed a lawsuit against Facebook for allowing advertisers to do precisely this, to limit housing ads based on race, gender, and other characteristics. In another similar story, ProPublica reporters paid $30 to buy ads on Facebook, targeting people interested in topics such as, quote, Jew hater, how to burn Jews, or history of why Jews ruined the world. And I apologize for these expressions. The ads were approved within 15 minutes. But when ProPublica asked the company about them, Facebook eliminated these categories, making it impossible for others to target ads. I think these are perfect examples of direct results based on critical technology reporting. Journalists noticed something that no one else had noticed. They did an experiment, tested it themselves, and wrote about it. Eventually, Facebook's internal policies changed, which in turn began to remediate these inequalities, these real-world inequalities. And this may not have happened if journalists had not written about it. This is how powerful we are and how powerful we can be. And these are just some of countless examples of great critical technology reporting that places like ProPublica and many others have done in the last few years. Tech companies are not only going to get more powerful and influential in the future, so we need more of this. How can you do the same kind of journalism? How can we do more of this? First of all, we need to be skeptical of what big tech companies tell us. These companies often claim that they're trying to save the world, that they're trying to connect humanity, and in part they are, but they're also just trying to make money. They're also just trying to get bigger, and that's okay. That's their business. But as journalists, our job is to highlight what these companies are doing wrong and write critically about it. Second, think about the hidden costs of these companies' innovations. Are these new technologies leaving anyone behind? Try to find out who they are and how. Third, amazing technologies and innovations can change the world overnight. Are they protracting problems from the old world, such as racism, discrimination, and sexism? Those are all issues worth investigating. Again, the goal is to keep these tech companies accountable. That means highlighting where they're failing and pushing them to do better. Thank you. And I would like to open it up for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. My name is Adrian. I'm working for a media startup called Republik. I have the privilege to work for a digital magazine which is entirely reader-funded and completely advertising-free. And I'm a tech reporter. Mm-hmm. So what do you recommend to tech reporters working for publishers which are more and more involved into the programs of Google and Facebook, such as Google News Initiative or the local journalism project of Facebook, where they claim they only fund the technical infrastructures of the platform, which is, in my opinion, very political and a no-go. Yeah, what is your opinion about that? And also, what is the policy of Motherboard?
Well, first of all, I'm jealous that you guys are entirely reader funded, because that's a luxury these days. In terms of recommendations, I think you just need to, I mean, if you're a reporter or an editor, you really need to distance yourself from these companies. And that may need pushing against, companies asking you not to write about them, forgetting about the fact that we rely on their traffic to read our stories. You just have to ignore it. You just have to forget about that and keep writing the stories, because eventually I believe that, we will prevail in some ways. And ultimately who we're serving is readers. We're not serving these companies. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if Facebook gets our traffic. We're serving the readers, and that's all that matters. In terms of our policy, I mean, that is our policy. We are separate, the newsroom is separated from the business side. So I don't care, to a certain extent, I don't care about Facebook and Google. I need to do my job, which is write about them or write about other companies in an objective way.
Hi, Lorenzo, Julia Angwin here. Thank you so much for calling out my work. That was super sweet. You should spend a little more time talking about your work, which is also spectacular.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I've always been curious, actually, like how reporters like you, I've always had the privilege, right, of being at ProPublica, where I didn't have to deal with access. But I would love to hear what your strategies have been in the newsroom, dealing with your editors, who I'm sure actually probably push for some of those things. I suspect maybe you do a good cop, bad cop thing, where like one reporter is the access reporter and then other reporters are the bad cops. But I would love to hear how you've navigated that.
Good question. I don't know if I have a great answer to that. We're pretty bad at access at Motherboard. We have pissed off almost everyone. But, ultimately these companies are made, they're made of people that realize that our work is important. So yeah, I mean, there's people that have better relationships with certain companies rather than others. But what has worked in my experience is talk to actual employees at these companies and go through them. So don't try not to interface too much with the PR department, because honestly, they're not that useful. And try to corner them into giving you an answer when you already have the whole story. So maybe you can ignore them throughout the whole reporting process and get to them at the last minute.
Hi, is it my turn? No? I'm very sorry.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask you, do you think there are other tech companies that we should be writing about and covering? Like, there is a lot of focus on Facebook, Google, maybe Uber or Amazon, but are there any other tech companies that you feel like there isn't any reporting yet about?
That's a tough question. I wanted to talk about these companies because they're the bigger ones and they're the most influential. And I believe that for many years, us journalists were not critical enough of them. So yeah, surely there's companies out there that are overlooked, but all these teachings apply to any company in the world. It doesn't even need to be tech companies. It can be oil, can be healthcare, can be cybersecurity companies, like in my case. It's all the same. Like, you still need to look at them with a critical eye.
Okay, so I guess now it's my turn. Hi, my name is Astrid. I'm from Germany, and I'm also a technology reporter. And I just wanted to say that, for example, car companies in Germany, who are also very powerful, they just apply the same techniques. And I think it's not really something particular about tech companies. It's whenever you have so much power, they try to really make you, wane out your voice. My question is, how do you actually really define access? I think there's this official access when you talk to the press people, but then there's the unofficial access to your sources. And in my experience, I've been banned from lots of official access, but I have the unofficial access. And then even though I'm banned from press conferences and whatever, people inside the companies, powerful people, they really respect my work. And even if it's a very critical piece, they contact me, and one of them, or some of them, have become my best sources, you know. And how do you handle this? What would you recommend? Isn't it always a mix of both? That's what I basically want to ask. Or how do you define in the US access? I think that's my problem. I don't understand that.
Well, I mean, it is a little bit of a mix of both. But as I was trying to say before, like, I think what we need to focus the most on is access through unofficial means. So it could be, you know, getting leaked documents. It could be talking to sources inside the companies. It could be by, you know, tricking these platforms to give you answers by using them. So yeah, I don't I mean, access is hard to define, but what I think access journalism is, I think of access journalism as something negative. It's like when you get too comfortable and rely only on what the companies feed you, rather than what they don't feed you. I mean, like, and you know, it works both ways. Like, what are the companies showing you? Like, they may be trying to hide what they actually don't want you to know. I don't know if that answers the question. But.
Hi, Flip from ABC Australia. It feels a bit like there's a gap in understanding in newsrooms with technology, like you say, has come to influence every aspect of our lives. But if I looked in my own newsroom, and myself included, to try and understand the complexity of algorithms and then report on it in a way that makes sense for people, it feels like we don't have enough of those jobs. We don't have enough of those people in newsrooms who actually understand the technology side of things. And often the editors are from a very different time in journalism, and they perhaps don't have those skills themselves. So how do we start to close that gap, which I think is in a lot of newsrooms? Yeah,
I mean, that is definitely a reality. I think that one of the solutions perhaps is journalism schools doing more tech-focused education. So, I mean, obviously we still need to use good old-fashioned reporting tools, you know, interviews, taking notes, all these basic things. We will always need them. But at this point, like, we need to learn technology, and we need to learn about technology from a very early stage. And if you're in a newsroom that doesn't understand it very much, maybe get your IT people involved. You know, like, at this point, every news organization has some technical people. You know, they could be working on the website, they could be coders. Try talking to them, maybe get them to do a presentation. You know, there's ways to get educated. Read more tech press. You know, we do good work, and yeah, I think that is one of the biggest challenges, though, and it's not easy to solve.
Matteo Moschella, formerly Storyful. Now I work for a tech company. Sorry. I was wondering if you had any tip for a journalist that would like to find out more about that company. Like, I don't know, for instance, like looking at former employee on LinkedIn. Like, what is one of the first steps that a reporter that wants to start to cover on a company would do? Mm-hmm. If you have any. Yeah. Now you want my secrets now. Okay. So, I mean, there's no like magic formulas, but you know, just like we are all connected, people that work at these companies are all connected as well. You know, as you said, like you mentioned LinkedIn. LinkedIn can be very useful. You can find employees there. You can message them directly. Twitter is a great tool as well. Most people that work in tech are on Twitter or Facebook. You can message them there. You can find out who their friends are. Maybe you have friends in common. You can use those friends as a leverage. Yeah, I mean, just use the internet. It's like it's out there, and it's actually not that hard.
And another secret is that the more you write about these companies, like what I found in my experience is that sometimes like the official view of the company is not the same as the employee's view. So if you highlight something that the company is not doing right, you actually get sources to come to you and talk to you because they want to like confirm that you were right and they want to speak out against their companies.
Hi, just to add to how to get to the companies. Well, I'm studying data journalism in UK now. Follow the money, and there was an earlier session about following the money. That's classic and useful.
Yeah, true. Like that's another like mantra that is always true.
Hi, Lorenzo. I don't understand why employees in these companies are so faithful to NDA.
I don't remember who said this, but NDAs are one of the worst drugs that are out there right now. They are faithful to them because they, as far as I understand, they will pay a lot if they don't. Especially Apple is very famous for punishing people, even former employees, from talking to the press. One of the ways that they punish them is that they lose stock or they have to pay a fine. They could be sued. So yeah, NDAs are a huge problem, but you can get around them. You know, you can offer anonymity. You can talk to more than one source so that, you know, you sort of like cloud where the information has come from and protect the sources that way.
Hi. I work in Myanmar, just as context. There's been some really amazing tech reporting relating to Myanmar and other parts of the world that are having problems with some of these big tech companies. I also work with a lot of civil society organizations that are doing really amazing monitoring work. So I guess my question is, how can you see tech reporters that are operating in companies and for outlets that the platforms and the tech companies actually care about? I guess I'm trying to connect tech reporters that have an influence with these companies with civil society groups and people that are doing monitoring or have local expertise in countries and contexts that don't get as much coverage. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's hard because so much of the tech press is US based, right? And unfortunately, what I found working in the US is that stories about the US get a lot more attention than stories not about the US. There's not an easy answer for that, but one of the tricks that sometimes has worked for us is that we get into a story about a place like Myanmar or some other country that's like not usually in the radar of American audiences, and we focus a little bit. We use the tech as a way into the story. Like last week, for example, I wrote about some malware that was, the story was an Italian. This was malware used in Italy. And the way we framed the story was that we talked about the fact that the malware was, we started talking about the fact that the malware was hosted on Google Play, which is something that everyone uses, right? Android is the biggest mobile platform in the world. So you can do that as a journalist. You can use the tech as a way into the story. But yes, civil society organizations are great to raise awareness and, you know, keep these companies accountable. So we should talk more to them. Yeah. Any last questions? Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for coming. And as a reminder, please come tomorrow at 4. My colleague Joseph Cox is giving a talk, so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be in the same room.
full.